talking about just the capturing the intention of the choreographer and just a little bit about the copyright. Okay, welcome back. Glad you sat it out for 5. This picture, just before we start, this is a picture that's Sean Bovum, Candace Brathwaite, and that was some Vasily, a Russian guy who was with the company for a short while, in the old company studio where the company is no more, at the ballet school, which is not called the ballet school anymore either, so it's all changed. Okay. As most of us are aware, choreographers each have their own working patterns. Initially, some are inspired by the subject matter, and sometimes during the planning stages of the work, the choreographer enjoys the luxury of having music specially composed for it. This way, the choreographer and composer can together steer the intention of the planned creation. During the preparations, the choreographer might already be creating the work with specific dances in mind. The intention further develops over the course of the creation through additional inspiration from the dancers, and it hopefully all finally comes together by the first performance. Where it concerns the notator, the aim is to record the intention, like I've been going on about that all week. If the choreographer and to bring it back to life at a later stage. Julia McGuinness-Scott wrote, "The notator working in the recording situation is responsible for separating the choreographer's intent from the dancer's interpretation." She continues to say that the video preserves the individual interpretation of the artist, and the choreographic score preserves the choreographer's intention and records all necessary information in analyzed form, including the dancer's locations and entrances and exits. Video recordings do not represent the movement content in dissected form. However, in the Eshkol-Bachmann system, the intention throughout the choreography is to treat movement being devoid of any emotional meaning, like we've said before. For them, it is the formal aspect of the relations and change of relations between the parts of the body that proves to be important. Therefore, it is of no relevance for its construction and use to know why, for what cause, and for what purpose a movement is performed. In the following video, the notation serves as an inspiration to choreography, and in turn also inspired an art exhibition arranged by Sharon Lockhart.
I was in Israel doing research for 2 weeks. My research was in textiles at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And slowly, it just naturally and organically led to someone telling me about Noa Eshkol and her textile work that she made from scrap fabrics, and she never cut any fabric, and that she also did a very minimalist dance notation system. And I've been interested in choreography and postmodern dance for quite a while, so it was very natural to go visit her house. Her notation system describes any conical or linear movement around any joint or limb. It's a universal system, which I think is incredible. It's used in science. It's used to diagnose autism and animal locomotion. And it's one of the only notation systems that's actually used in science. So that was appealing, but also that it's such a strict system. It's structural, it's formal. It's nothing like postmodern dance, but it's in this very, it's like between modernism and postmodernism, but it's so radical. I've never seen anything like it, and also that they dance to a metronome, that there's no theatricality. She didn't believe in the stage. She didn't believe in, costumes or lighting or music. there's no interpretation in her dances, so there's no like, there's no, oh, feel this. Everything is based on a joint or a limb. And the dances are very short. I mean, I think the longest one is like 6 minutes. They're really physically exhausting to do. Very small group of people that trained with her for, most of them, over 40 years. Noah believed that if you wanted to learn the notation system, it wasn't something that you could just take a class in. You actually had to devote a lifetime to. And so most of them are in their late 60s or early 70s. They go for 5 hours a day and practice and do the notations, even after her death. And, no one's being paid. It's really a labor of love. All of them grew up on a kibbutz, and, for all of them it was a very big step to devote their life to learning the notation system and to know Eshkol. She was a very tough person. She wasn't easy to work with. She was also brilliant. For the last few years, I've been making exhibitions where I'm bringing in other people's work into my exhibitions, and for me, this was really challenging to be asked to do an exhibition, a museum exhibition, but to title it Sharon Lockhart Noah Eshkol, because I want it to be a two-person exhibition, a two-woman exhibition. I really see a balance between her work and my work. I mean, the archival work, the carpets, the dances, and the models, the photographs that she made in the early 50s as a tool to understand the notation system. I see those as a kind of a perfect collaboration of my photography and her early invention of the system. Her carpets also have this strict system, but at the same time, it's the opposite, because she's using all found fabrics, basically from dumpsters or an umbrella she'd find on the street, or people would bring her remnants of old skirts, and she would take it as is and never use scissors to alter the fabrics, but she would make these incredible designs with those found fabrics. So it's using another kind of language, and I like this wordplay that she called them wall carpets and not tapestries or quilts, and that they do have this sculptural presence. In the films, they're on a vertical plane, and then in the exhibition, they're all on a horizontal plane. Well, I collaborate with two architects in Los Angeles, Escher and Martino, Frank and Ravi, and we've been working together since 2000. And for this piece, I wanted each dance they're all to the same metronome beat of 120 beats per minute, and they're all in sync, but they all also have their own soundtracks. So we designed 5 volumes that are sculptural, and it's not a black box situation. A lot of my thinking and with Frank and Ravi is that it's based on the viewer's movement through the space, and that you're making these patterns. It's a little scary to do something in your hometown, because they're all the artists that I love and admire. So.
Social anthropologist John Blacking, who I've mentioned before, stated, "Notation gives to dance a degree of permanence and allows works to be studied reflectively and critically away from the excitement of performance. The practical purpose of any notation system is to recreate works, and sometimes preferably as close as possible to the original intention. In the reproduction from notation, one can extract specific or detailed information, thereby attempting to honor the choreographer's original intentions. even though no single performance or interpretation can ever be the same. During my apprenticeship as choreologist with the Royal Ballet in 1989, I had the privilege to work with Sir Kenneth Macmillan. I was assigned for my final qualification as a Benesh Choreologist to notate a master score of the ballet he originally created for John Cranko's company in Stuttgart and revived for the Royal Ballet 2 years later. It was called My Brother, My Sisters. In the review of the revival for the Royal Ballet, the critic for the Sunday Times, David Dougal, described it as a gloom-laden work to dark pieces by Schoenberg and Webern in a brooding decor by Yolanda Son-Arend. The theme of a family of grown-up children engaged in incestuous and tormenting games, stalked by a figure of death. In another review in the Evening Standard, Edward Thorpe wrote, throughout his career, Kenneth Macmillan has been fascinated by the dark side of the human psyche, and no work in his canon of 60-odd ballets is more strange and disturbing than My Brother, My Sisters. Mary Clark's hailed it as an extraordinarily taut and terrifying piece of dramatic dance. You can't pretend to like a ballet of this nature, but goodness how you have to admire it. The accumulation of evil and horror is brilliantly achieved. The scripted opinions of the critics do give one some sort of assessment of their perceptions of the intention of the choreographer, as would, I imagine, the experience of the audience if it were asked. I personally found it a fascinating study in how the choreography suited the carefully chosen choice of music by Schoenberg and Webern, 16 short pieces in all. Although it had been notated for the first season in Stuttgart in 1978 and first revived for the Royal Ballet in 1980, only a working copy of the score existed, and I could already see it was a tough score to be mastered. And that's probably why I was assigned to it as the final test. It has been a subject for discussion that the entirely working copy, I don't think, no, not yet. No, this just leave it there, thank you. The entirely work, I'll repeat that. It has been a subject for discussion that the entire untidy working copy often gives a feel of the life of a work, and when revived, it is interesting that the rough notes can exhale a sense of the intention. It's like going through old letters as well, much like the scribbles of some choreographers. But the busy choreologist Monica Parker could only attend some of the learning rehearsals of My Brother, My Sisters. As a result, the dancers were running up and down between the studio and the video room. At that time, the use of video wasn't allowed in the studio, and it actually still isn't, and rehearsals had to be done to piano. I believe it had to do with the musician union rules, as I've mentioned before, and it is probably still the same requirement. The Royal Ballet had done the ballet 9 years before, and fortunately the same male dancer, Wayne Eagling, was doing the role of the brother, so that helped a lot. But it also meant that it was revived much quicker than I had anticipated. That made my job all the more distressing, but a good grounding for the everyday state of affairs of a notator. There were some intricate group work situations in the choreography that needed careful attention, not to mention the Webern and Schoenberg scores. Macmillan wasn't always present at these rehearsals as he was busy choreographing his Prince of the Pagodas to Benjamin Britten's music. I was not directly involved with pagodas, but I did have to take over for a few rehearsals as notator while Macmillan's regular choreologist, Monica Parker, was away in America teaching one of his ballets. Whenever there was doubt about movements done the day before, he would turn to me and ask, and I've mentioned this before, Edward, what does the Bible say? That kind of expression of confidence gave me the assurance that studying Benesh notation was the right thing for me at the time. Because you keep on thinking, did I do the right thing? Change of career. After my return from London, Phyllis Spire and I, in one presentation of Ballet Boutique, paid tribute to Kenneth Macmillan, who died in 1992. Here is a small section from My Brother, My Sisters, which I taught our dancers for the occasion. This section is done to the third movement of Schoenberg's 5 pieces for orchestra, opus 16. I've included some parts of notation at the beginning, and we were also fortunate to have the late Melanie Horn accompanying on the piano. I just apologize for the sound quality because it was taken from an old video, so I wasn't able to actually get the noise out. And also somehow on my computer the film itself was fine, but now playing it, it's slightly jerky, so I hope it's not too disturbing. This is the notation of parts of it. And there I put the music again at the top, slave.
intention.
When this was originally done in Stuttgart, one of the dancers was Jean Allenby, who used to be with our company donkeys years ago, in the late 60s, early 70s, and then went to join Stuttgart. So her name was continuing on the old score, so it was like quite strange for me. In the small staff office at the Royal Ballet, the old Royal Ballet premises, that's before they moved to the Opera House when it was revamped and they've got better facilities. When I took the photograph I showed you earlier, I had more than just a few conversations with Macmillan. It was just sitting, chatting, about everything, and the fact that when he became a choreographer, he said to me, "You do realize it's because of David Poole that I'm a choreographer today." And it was because David Poole ran, at the Old Sadler's Wells, he ran the choreographic group. And one of the choreographers fell ill, and then he couldn't continue to do the ballet. And then David said to Macmillan always was he had a bit of, suffered from stage fright, and he said, "No, I can't do it." He said, "You do it." He said, "I can't," but then he did it, and that particular ballet went into the repertoire and started his entire career. So he said it to me, it's because of David Poole. So, and I've heard about where people talk about his origin as a choreographer, and where they just leave out that story, and it's just a strange sort of thing. Bring the facts back.
My original intention of movement is absolutely caught every time I finish imitation. And for me, it's the best system, and I would never do without it.
Britain's foremost choreographers, Kenneth Macmillan, made extensive use of Benesh notation to record his work.
I think Kenneth's use of the Benesh process was actually, the Benesh notation was an integral part of the whole creative process for him. The minute he knew that he had an accurate, immediate way of writing down as he was working that could constantly be refined and corrected, he could free himself in a way that allowed him to work without having to remember what dancers had done 2 minutes before. I think the extraordinary thing about it is its ability to be so clear and accurate and analytical without getting bogged down in theories and things. I think it means that certainly now it is no longer around. It's absolutely the Bible for his work. And from being fascinated in watching the way it was used in the actual making of the work, to now see things come to life because of the use of the Benesh is fantastic.
Arnold Haskell, I don't know if you've read any books of his, from the much older generation. The famous author said, I quote, "And any experienced dancer can arrange a small solo or a pas de deux for herself or himself that will be effective by dipping into the large repertoire of ready-made movement. And that ready-made movement, we must assume he means the established classical ballet, contemporary and other techniques that are taught." He goes on to say, it is the orchestration of dancing that is the choreographer's function. He refers to the relationship of the dance to the drama, without the need of extraneous literary explanation, and in close contact with both the form and the spirit of the musical score. The faithful recreation process of a dance work relies on various elements and procedures, the most important element being the motivation behind each and every movement. Here it is important that the notator understands not only the choreographer's intentions, but also the music score. The film you are about to see is of Amanda Isles again, talking about, but it's a different one, of working with Wayne McGregor.
My name is Amanda Isles. I am a freelance Benesh choreologist and stager, and I've been working with professional dance companies, both ballet and contemporary, for 30 years. I trained in Benesh in 1987, and I'm still using it now. So Benesh is such a wonderful tool to assist in so many ways, both in the creation of new work, but also with the reproduction of work once it has been created. People very often ask me, what's the need for notation now that we have such sophisticated video and filming resources? And interestingly, I think it still has a very important role to play. A video will give you a version of one person doing the choreography, whereas what the notation will bring is another whole layer, many layers in fact, of information, specifically information that came from the choreographer about intention, about what you're actually aspiring to do. Dance is a living, breathing thing, and on any given day, any performance may well be different. And therefore, if you're following a video from one performance, you're only looking at one interpretation. And so I love having the score available in the rehearsal process so that I can add information, I can really add value. And also I know that I am assisting in helping maintain the integrity of the work, what the choreographer really was trying to achieve. Which may be very difficult, and we may not quite get there, but we know what we're trying for.
So we're super lucky at the Royal Ballet that we have full-time notators working with us in the studio, and you know that dance is a very collaborative art form, and one of the unsung heroes of dance making are the notators, and I thought it would be really nice for us to get an insight into what is notation, what do notators do, and how do they kind of recreate the work when the choreographer's not in the room?
So I just wanted to explain a little bit, because people often say to me, oh, notation isn't that just for sort of ballet and, you know, nutcracker, the nutcracker form of ballet, and they sort of puzzled as to how I could possibly notate Wayne's movement. And the thing is, movement, in the same way that choreographic movement has evolved and developed over many years, notation as a language has evolved and developed as well. And we have a huge body of information that we can capture in the notation. And working with Wayne, which is a fascinating process, I always feel it's a little bit like a sculptor who starts with a kind of wire frame and you build layers and layers. And when you end up with a finished product, those individual layers are not discernible, but they are nevertheless essential to that finished product. And what I'm trying to capture in the notation is those layers, so that we don't lose that detail. Wayne is incredibly detailed when he's creating, gives the dancers a huge amount of information. And so for me, it's a real pleasure to be able to input that depth of information into when we're working with an alternate cast, when we come back to a piece on its second viewing, as it were, and we have alternate casts, new casts. It's a real pleasure to be able to sort of give them all those layers of information. With notation, you have kind of three elements of the information. You have what the body is doing, you have the relation of that movement to the music or the sound, and then you have your relationship in space and to the other people on stage. And so the sort of the way your energy is directed and how that interacts with everybody else, you can very easily put into the score. So it's a great tool to have in the studio, and it's lovely that Wayne appreciates it so much. So it's a good kind of collaboration. It's good synergy, I think.
Okay. The choreographer works intensively with specifically chosen dancers, and the creation is often a combination of his or her intention and the dancer's talents. The dancers that choreographers usually cast are those they like to work with and those they can trust to convey their so-called choreographic message. There is usually a special synergy between the creator and performer while the dance work is being created. In the next film, Veronica Paper is working with Daria Klimentova in 1993 on Walpurgis Nacht. Here, this is a little bit jerky, this one, so I hope you don't mind. I didn't expect it to be.
It's 2 counts, 6, 7. Not bad. One there. Stop it, good. And again. 1, 2.
Daria Klimatova was very young then. She had been in the Standard Bank International Competition in Pretoria and won it. And one of the conditions that she could join one of the companies. So she joined the company for 2 years. But she was trained in the Russian method in Czechoslovakia and couldn't move very fast. And Veronica's work was always very fast. So you could see her struggling a bit to actually get, but that eventually she got it. It takes endless rehearsal time to get the choreographer's intention established. Like, that would be weeks of rehearsal. Just for on that one solo. Established when a ballet is being created, the dancers are continuously under the watchful eyes of the choreographer. However, it is not always a given that the outcome will be what the choreographer originally had in mind. It is an ongoing process. The notator needs to track the thought process like a shadow. Often it is at the final stage rehearsals where quite a bit of the crucial information concerning interpretation is shared. I was one of the two employed notators at the time when Rudy van Danzig first came to teach the company his 4 last songs in 1994. It was an important occasion for me because he was my director at Dutch National Ballet in the 1970s. I was always using a video camera in rehearsals while notating, also keeping in mind the historical value of the footage. In this footage, Rudy is working on the timing while the dancers follow him out of the corners of their eyes. Much of the interpretation is inspired by the musical phrasing. The recording was used for rehearsal purposes, whereas in performances the ballet was done to live orchestra with a guest singer. Here we see Rudy van Danzig working with Linda Lee and Hisham Boumediene. Sorry, I just need to. This is as loud as it can be. Sorry. Leave the lights on. Rudy was reteaching the ballet he had choreographed on Dutch National Ballet. He kept asking me why I was notating, as there was already a score written in Amsterdam. But that would mean we would have to hire it for an agreed period of time and at a fee for any reproduction when he's not around, depending on the contract. In this case, Rudy knew every detail of his own ballet, and while he was still alive, would prefer to attend to it himself while away from Amsterdam. After Rudy had left, I never found time to complete the score as we were moving on to the next ballets. Here we see the same with Mandy Stover and Brendan McLaren, just doing a different ballet. Have the lights, please. And the next one. Every time I watch this old video footage that I took, I'm still very aware of the emotion and the intention this particular ballet creates. Because I was present in the studio studying Rudy's involvement with the music and his passionate demeanor. And he was like that in all the rehearsals. He got into it completely, you know, in Amsterdam as well. Next one. For the purpose of the recreation of a work, apart from a Benesh Movement Notation master score, the use of film or DVD, and often the descriptive writings or discussions of various authors and or critics can be beneficial towards the study and understanding of the historical interpretations of the choreography. One ideally creates a folder adding everything relevant to the production. It is actually also a recommendation to include pictures of the set and costume designs. Even lighting designs are valuable because a lighting designer may be able to interpret the intention of the original lighting through the use of the newer technology. Because sometimes with the newer technology you think, especially now with LED lighting, it's not the same. It doesn't have that same warm feeling of what I saw before in some ballets. Only recently I discovered some notes written by John Simons that I had included in a folder with my personal copy of the score I notated of Veronica Paper's John the Baptist. John Simons was the original cast as John, and I had asked him to jot down a few notes about the interpretation of the role. And this is his writing in the words, and that's some of the notation. Words and sentences used by the choreographer are also included in the notated score, because it does give the dancers in the rehearsal room more information on the choreographer's intention. As you can see in John's writing, the first few sentences, heaviness of the body into the plie plus rock, with the quality of the rise, like being pulled down into and by quicksand. So it's a kind of a descriptive thing, the imagery that we were talking about yesterday when I said that you can add into the dynamics as well. So there are quite a few pages of that. So if one ever reproduces, one will bring that out and then show the dancers that. Sometimes the notator hasn't had enough time to master the score and may consult the video to check things to jog the memory. The important factor in recreating the choreographer's intentions is for the producer, stager, or choreologist to consult the notation and the film on their own and teaching from the score. Because there's some risk in showing the film to the dancers learning the part too early, as the film represents a record of the interpretation. And some dancers may end up copying even the individual traits of the dancer on screen and not fully understand the choreographer's intention. So that's the tricky part there. Dancers have to find their own interpretations. It is important when they're performing works, new works, that have been done previously by others. And very often it is the emotional quality coupled to the intention of the choreographed movement that will define the interpretation. Next one. Choreographers have various ways of working, and the process of creation can also depend on their mood and receptiveness of the dancers they cast. As the choreographer Michael Folke said, the fantasy comes during rehearsals. When Elrod Haskell asked him how far dancers collaborate with him in a production, he answered, and I quote, "I never conceive works for particular artists, but the particular artist does lead me to make modifications. I did not create L'Spectre de la Rose from Nijinsky, but because of his particular style, it became less masculine and quite different from what I myself made of it. Petrushka also I did not compose deliberately for Nijinsky. He left his mark on it, but there are various possible interpretations. That is why these works can be so constantly revived." Okay, then there's the issue of musicality. The choreographer and or producer may have set some movements to certain musical phrasings, and which the dancer may not have exactly executed as required in a specific performance. This might just be the performance that is preserved on film. If some time has passed, and if it is necessary for a new dancer to quickly learn the role from the video, hopefully the choreographer or the same producer is around to set the record straight, to say, hang on, that was wrong. The stager or producer has to be very clear in what the choreographer wanted. If the choreographer is present in the reconstruction, in some cases he or she might even decide to change a few things. And that can and does happen. The notator will then add another version to the score. The digital age has produced new possibilities and challenges for dancers. They can study a ballet from their cell phone, an iPad, or Kindle. Live screenings of ballets are more and more an everyday occurrence, and the availability of various productions that are on YouTube at the touch of a button away. Documentaries that were hidden away in archival depositories make sudden appearances. One is particularly grateful for all the new possibilities of seeing these documentaries on choreographers talking about their work. It brings one back to first-hand descriptions, other perspectives, opinions, and prospective research. Dancers can have access to look at these productions on their own and perhaps study different interpretations for the purpose of interpretation. Care needs to be taken through, though, in how the information is treated. Perhaps bad habits may be copied without the dancer being fully informed, or an overload could confuse the dancer. When studying a role for the purpose of performing it in an upcoming season, it is important that the dancers are made aware of the choreographer's intentions. Because often a choreographer walks in after it's been taught and so on, or if they learned it of a video, so the choreographer says, that's not at all what I meant. It's completely wrong. And then has to do something about it. And that's, I've been in rehearsals like that. This way of learning should preferably be done in, sorry, where am I now? It's rehearsal directly, if possible, the notator. Stories about situations that inspired the choreographer are not just interesting, but they can give vital clues towards the interpretation. Kenneth Macmillan was in Stuttgart in 1976 to choreograph his Requiem to the Gabriel Fauré score in memory of John Cranko, who died suddenly in 1973. The ballet premiered in Stuttgart apparently because at that time the Royal Opera House board thought the chosen music inappropriate for a ballet. And that happened with quite a few of Macmillan's ballets. He once had to he moved to Berlin to become the resident choreographer there because the Opera House wouldn't allow him to use certain music for certain ballets. Macmillan was accompanied by his wife and baby daughter. In the solo that was written for Marcia Haydee, Macmillan was inspired by the infant daughter's spontaneous dancing to music by Vivaldi. This is a copy of a page from the Requiem score of the ballet that was being revived by Georgette Tsinguridis. This is actually Tsinguridis, her score. Georgette was from the Stuttgart company and had notated the work when it was first created. If you look right at the top of the page, where the red line is, you'll see always soft, curved hands. That's what I wrote down when they were she was reteaching the ballet, and I saw all that, and they were talking about what he wanted, but it wasn't written in the score, so I started jotting those things down. Next one. In A, you'll see there, I included this in the score as Macmillan when I redid the score, mastered it actually, so I put everything in. I included this in the score as Macmillan kept referring to the baby hands, and you can see that one also references and dates the comments. Did I do it? Yes, I've done it the 4th of the 10th, 89. In B, this solo is done with a childlike innocence and slightly playful. That's also written there. These indications can, in fact, help one to recreate the choreographer's intentions, because there is a solo that Marcia Haydee did where she stands like this. And those hands were the baby hands that the little baby had in the cot. So he used this in the choreography. So whenever they do those things, it's like playful, it's the baby hands. So if you don't remind the dancers about that, they will start doing something else, you know, which doesn't have any relevance. So, this is my copy. Not a terribly neat one, but it was when they did it at a different. So Leslie Collier was then the soloist there. At the start of the score, which I mastered for the Royal Ballet, adding a few different details that came up during the revival process. My score has since been used to do later revivals by the Royal Ballet staff, and I'm sure notes and comments and perhaps some corrections have been added to honor the spirit and intentions of the choreographer. This here is the next person's writing, you know, just to add in something more. Okay, now we get to the last part of this lecture, which is the copyright. The issue of copyright is always something that lurks in the background and something that dance practitioners should perhaps be more aware of. It's something that I was not fully aware of until I went to study at the Benesh Institute 32 years ago. My decision to include something on copyright is not to give any directive, but merely to start the conversation on the issue and to make people more aware of it. A lot of dancers who start choreographing are not aware of copyright, especially in our country. When a work is notated and lodged at Benesh International in London, all the relevant information is included. The copyright owner is the choreographer, unless he has assigned it, and the score owner is the person or the organization who commissions the choreologist to notate the choreographic work. So they're different people who own different parts of it. Copyright notices have to be displayed on choreographic scores, and when they are lodged at Benesh International, they have to be accompanied by the written authorization of the copyright owner and the score owner. So there are a lot of forms to fill in as well. The score cannot be photocopied unless permission is granted, and no one can have access to it without permission from the copyright or score owners. But permission may be obtained from private study, research, or reproduction. So, for instance, scores that I sent over to be put in the library there, I've given permission for study. So I did that especially because just in case they might find mistakes in the notation, they could say, oh, you know, there's a problem here. Because that often happens, you know, when you do a master score, there can be mistakes, but not totally unreadable mistakes, theoretical ones. In 1923, Michael Fokey was in London by invitation to arrange the dances for James Elroy Flecker's play Hassan to music by Frederick Delius, and visited the author Cyril W. Beaumont, well-known dance historian and theorist, amongst other things. Beaumont writes, Fokey was particularly pungent in his remarks on those he considered to have copied or plagiarized his choreographic compositions. When I asked if he regarded X's production of an Oriental ballet set to the music by Rimsky-Korsakov as an imitation of his own Scheherazade, he said to me, it is same with one big alteration. Where I make Shah stand on the right, he makes Shah stand on the left. So in other words, he copied the whole thing, you know, so he saw it. It was, gosh, now I've forgotten the name. The famous, it's from an opera. It was a section from an opera. In Sir Peter Wright's book, Rights and Wrongs, My Life in Dance, I don't know if you know about the book, and it's quite an interesting book. He writes about Sir Kenneth Macmillan and his process of choreography. Where he says in Berlin, Kenneth needed to work in private when he was creating. He always began with the dancers for the pas de deux, along with only the notator and the pianist. He did trust Monica Parker, notator, who I've mentioned before, and at one time director of the Benesh Institute, who was extremely good at interpreting his intentions. because she already knew his kind of way of movement, like Amanda Isles with McGregor. And Wright goes on to say that Kenneth was very suspicious too that other choreographers would steal his ideas and steps. With good cause. This did happen frequently because Kenneth's strong personal signature made his choreography very distinctive and other people tended to be influenced by it. Wright goes on to tell us that Kenneth, furious, once made a choreographer change the end of a ballet which showed the same ending as one of his own ballets. At another time there was almost a court case when a lot of his ideas were copied. And I know of a lot more things that have happened in this country where people also discovered, copied somebody, not here in Cape Town, copied some Hirikilians of his style and some of his ballets almost step for step. That person now lives in America. To quote Wright again, it is a huge help to have a notator working with you. You may be working on creating a solo one day, getting midway through before you are able to go back to it, by which time you may well have forgotten the details because you have been involved with other parts of the ballet. One important advantage is that choreographers can have their works registered for copyright if it's notated. Previously it had been impossible to make a claim without written evidence. But you can do it also now at one stage only by if it's written down or on paper. You can also do it now if it's on video, but on the video you have to have every little detail on it. At the end, all the credits and everything, it's all got to be on it. The fundamentals, in other words, the movement vocabulary of classical ballet, like that of music, are